Hello, Bible readers. Today we come to the end of the beginning of the Bible. And before I consider some of the big themes, I want to put a bow on these last couple chapters. In the last post, I mentioned how Jacob knows what continuity there really can be between generations. And he knows, first of all, that every generation in his family has to depend on the promises of God. So that's the first thing. More than any other, even more than Abraham, really, Jacob has had to rely on the promise of God during a life that was full of conflict. He found that the promise never failed. That's what Jacob is getting at in chapter 48, verses 3-4. He's looking back and he's saying the promise never failed. It's a pretty crucial moment in the history of Israel as we read along, as these chapters, they sit in Scripture between the Joseph narrative itself and then the challenges that are just about to come as we flip a couple pages toward Exodus. Joseph has, of course, tilted things toward Egypt, but remembering how faithful God is to the promises God made, that's what separates Israel's inheritance from all things Egyptian. You know, the Egyptian world, that's not who Israel is going to be or who they are. It kind of looks like what they are through Joseph, but Jacob's blessing to his sons clarifies where they stand, and that is in faith. That's where they stand. Jacob is calling on his son to trust the promise and only the promise, nothing else. And Jacob knows that embracing the promise requires a decision, disengagement from other stuff, in this case, Egyptian falseness. As we'll later see in the Bible, you can't serve two masters, and that's basically what Jacob is saying here. It's the promise and nothing else. The second thing Jacob knows provides continuity to the generations is hope. So the promise and hope. He's trying to use his memories and convert them into a living hope for his son. As Brueggemann says, Jacob's final task before death is to see that hope continues to be the main business of this family. The way of Egypt, and really every worldly kingdom, is to ignore the future in favor of a present when the powers that are remain uncriticized. Can't say anything against them. Don't worry about tomorrow, says worldly power. I'm going to be in control then too. Just believe that. As for today, don't complain. Obey. There is no hope in a system like that. Jacob knows that when they believe in God's promise, that first thing, that will bless them with hope, the second big thing of continuity. And Jacob also knows that hope in God's future is going to put them into conflict with any worldly present. Hope is dangerous to worldly empires. That's been Jacob's experience too. So Jacob knows that promise and hope are how the generations experience continuity. And the third thing, maybe the most obvious way this family continues through generations, is through a blessing. So that's the third big word, is blessing. From the beginning, Jacob has lived for the generation to come. His task here at the end of his life is not only to bind the generations together. I mean, you could bind generations together with lots of different things. It's nice to have a united, bound together intergenerational family. You can do that with all sorts of things. Jacob intends to bind the generation to come to the promise. The promise is more powerful and enduring than any generation. And it's important to say that the promise is not a fuzzy, optimistic feeling about the future. That's not what believing the promise is. Believing the promise is a concrete assurance about being heirs to a new kingdom, yet to be given in full. We've seen concreteness given to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, to Joseph. They've had hints. We'd call them foretastes of the feast to come, but the full blessing in the land is still to come, because that's what the blessing promises, right? Is this promise of land, descendants, being a blessing to the whole world. The other thing about the word blessing, blessings are given for a time of waiting. You don't offer a blessing and poof, magically the promise is fulfilled. Jacob blesses, the generations of Jacob's ancestors have blessed. These blessings are for the sake of waiting, so that as they wait, they hope. And in their hope, they live into that promise. All these things are connected, blessing, hope, and promise. And all of it, the whole scene, is the way of faith between generations as they look at this approaching death for Jacob. Death is a sort of departure, after all. And Jacob is handing off what he can to those who will remain. The formal handoff, where Jacob crosses his hands and puts his right hand on Ephraim instead of the elder Manasseh. Why does he mess this up? Well, are we really surprised at this point that God's promise would make its way forward unconventionally? Might be more surprising if it goes according to plan. It's kind of par for the course at this point, right? No reasonable explanation is given. Again, typical. It basically is a story that affirms the mysterious way of God. As we come to the end of this book, we see that Genesis is not an ending at all. It's like a movie that ends, and obviously there's going to be more. There's going to be a sequel or a part 2. Genesis is only part of a larger story and doesn't pretend at all to be self-contained. In the last few paragraphs, the brothers are pleading for forgiveness, right? They fall down before Joseph, but Joseph never says, "I forgive you." He leaves that work to God. "Do not be afraid," he says. Am I in the place of God? Brueggemann wonders, what does this enigmatic response of Joseph mean? Could be a good faith response. Could be a resentful refusal to forgive. Could be a playful response that keeps his brothers and keeps all of his brothers on their toes. Or Joseph may be asserting that the guilt of his brothers is not his problem. He wants to deal with things that are his problem. But fear not. Well, it's a pretty important phrase in all of Scripture, not just here. So maybe that phrase tells us that Joseph is simply offering a fresh new relationship to his brothers. He's not going to offer forgiveness because he believes that's God's to give. But he is offering a fresh new relationship. Move on from the fear that comes with your guilt. Fear not. Verse 20 is a summary of the entire Joseph narrative. Even though you intended to do harm to me, God intended it for good. None of the ways of Pharaoh or the brothers could keep God's will from happening. The evil plans of humans cannot defeat God's purpose. Instead, they unwittingly become ways in which God's plan moves along. And the plan of God is always good. Now, I know I'm going long on this last post, but this little bit is worth it. Remember back in the creation narrative, in the beginning, the Hebrew word used to describe each part of creation was tov, good. Boker tov even was very good. Well, that word, tov, gets used again here at the end. Chapter 50, verse 20. God intended it for good. Tov. The point? God has used even the ways of Joseph's brothers to bring creation closer to its rich fulfillment. That is God's overriding purpose through the whole of Scripture. To use the ways, even ways like Joseph's brothers, to bring creation to its fulfillment. Remember that, and you'll have a pretty good way to understand every other story and narrative of the Bible. That is always God's intent, is to do good, very good. Genesis is a very good place to start a deep dive into our Bible reading. I really appreciate your efforts to join me as you have at least listened to me or maybe even read along. It's been a journey of considering God's call, right? God first calls the world into being by speaking it into existence. God's speech, it turns out, is creative. This living speech, the Word, has real concrete power. It makes things. And that same word that called creation concretely into being calls me and you into God's church. It's the same kind of call that Abraham and Sarah embraced, that Jacob listened to even through a life full of conflict, a call that worked its hidden way through the life of Joseph. As we are blessed with this call, just like Jacob offers a blessing to his son, which is given as a way to faithfully wait for God's promise to be completely fulfilled, we too are blessed in our waiting. And while we wait, we have a momentary choice to make. Do we embrace God's call? May the Lord bless you in your waiting as the Lord keeps us. Keep faith alive.